Imagine holding in your hand a Jefferson nickel from the year 1977, a coin that at first glance looks like any other nickel you might find in your pocket change. But beneath its surface lies a fascinating story of American history, coinage design, economic conditions, and numismatic intrigue. This small 5-cent piece, minted in vast numbers during the late 1970s, carries with it not only the portrait of one of America's most influential founding fathers, but also the legacy of a coin series that had already been circulating for nearly 4 decades by that time. To truly appreciate the 1977 Jefferson Nickel, we must travel back to the origins of the series itself, to the year 1938, when the United States Mint held a competition to replace the Buffalo nickel, which had been in circulation for 25 years. The winning design, created by artist Felix Schlag, introduced the now familiar image of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello, his iconic Virginia home, on the reverse. The Jefferson nickel quickly became a mainstay of American coinage, and by 1977 it was not just a piece of change, but a symbol of continuity, stability, and national identity. Now, when we look specifically at the 1977 issue, we must place it within the broader historical and economic context of the decade. The 1970s were a turbulent time for the United States, with inflation, economic challenges, and shifting cultural dynamics, and yet the Jefferson nickel maintained its consistent role as one of the most widely used coins in daily commerce. The nickel of 1977 was struck at 3 primary minting facilities: the Philadelphia Mint, which at that time did not use a mint mark, the Denver Mint marked with a D, and the San Francisco Mint, which struck proof coins marked with an S. These 3 mints ensured that millions of Jefferson nickels would enter circulation, meeting the needs of a growing economy, while also providing high-quality collector issues for numismatists. The obverse of the 1977 Jefferson nickel continued to feature the familiar left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson as envisioned by Schlag decades earlier. Jefferson's hair detail, the sharpness of the lettering, and the clarity of the mottos. "In God we trust." Liberty and the date all varied depending on strike quality and die condition, which today plays a crucial role in how collectors assess the value and rarity of surviving examples. The reverse showcased Monticello, still a centerpiece of American neoclassical architecture and a lasting symbol of Jefferson's vision for the young nation. Coins of 1977 with strong strikes on the steps of Monticello are highly sought after by collectors, since the detail in those steps often wore down quickly due to shallow die engraving. In terms of mintage numbers, the Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of coins. The Denver Mint also struck a similarly vast number, while the San Francisco Mint focused on creating high-quality proof coins. For collector sets, when we combine these figures, we see that the 1977 nickel was not rare in terms of overall availability, but condition rarity comes into play. The higher the grade, the fewer the surviving examples, and that is what makes certain specimens worth far more than face value today. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC have given us detailed population reports showing that while common circulated pieces hold only minimal value, high-grade, uncirculated, and proof examples, especially those with deep cameo contrast or flawless luster, can command strong premiums. The search for full-step examples with every line of Monticello's stairs clearly defined has become almost legendary among Jefferson nickel enthusiasts, and the 1977 issue is no exception. Collectors spend years hunting for these high-quality coins, and their rarity drives strong competition in the marketplace. But the story of the 1977 Jefferson nickel does not end with mintage and condition. When we explore its role in circulation, we see how it touched countless lives across the nation in an era before debit cards and mobile payments. Coins were vital for daily transactions. Whether for vending machines, bus fares, or everyday purchases, the nickel represented convenience and stability. Even as the American economy faced inflationary pressures in the 1970s, the 5-cent piece retained its role as an essential part of commerce. This adds a cultural and historical depth to the 1977 nickel, making it more than just a small disc of metal, but rather a window into how Americans lived and spent during that period. Errors and varieties are another fascinating dimension of the 1977 nickel's history, as with any large-scale minting operation. Mistakes occurred, and these minting anomalies can transform an ordinary coin into a prized collectible. Examples include off-center strikes, double dies, clipped planchets, and die cracks. Each of these errors tells a story of the minting process itself and gives us a chance to understand the technical challenges faced by the United States Mint. During that time, dedicated collectors often pay substantial premiums for these rare error coins, and the 1977 Jefferson Nickel has its share of known varieties that spark numismatic excitement. To create a full professional history of this coin, we must also connect it to the broader narrative of Jefferson's legacy and the evolution of American coinage. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, was more than just a statesman. He was a thinker, a philosopher, and a visionary who left his mark on the nation through documents like the Declaration of Independence and his lifelong advocacy for democracy, education, and architecture. His presence on the nickel was no accident. It was a deliberate choice by the Mint to honor a man who helped shape the identity of the Republic. Monticello on the reverse further reinforces this personal connection to Jefferson's ideals by featuring the home. He designed himself a monument to intellect, design, and civic virtue. As we continue to explore the 1977 Jefferson Nickel, we can discuss its position within the larger span of the series. Stretching from 1938 through modern issues, the nickel of 1977 represents the pre-modern era. Before significant design changes were introduced in the early 2000s, it captures a snapshot of American coinage in its classic form, untouched by modern commemorative updates and unaltered by the later return to Jefferson's more lifelike portrait in 2005. This makes the 1977 nickel a historically pure representation of the mid-20th century coinage tradition for collectors, historians, and everyday Americans alike. The Jefferson Nickel of 1977 holds significance beyond its modest face value. It stands as a bridge between tradition and change, between the artistry of the 1930s and the transformations of the modern mint, between the Jeffersonian vision of democracy and the everyday reality of carrying coins in your pocket. This small piece of nickel and copper alloy encapsulates decades of heritage, economic resilience, and the enduring role of coinage in American life. By the time we finish exploring the vast layers of its story, from its design origins to its mintage details, from condition rarity to collector demand, from its cultural context to its technical varieties, we realize that the 1977 Jefferson Nickel is not just a coin, it is a historical artifact, a collectible treasure, and a piece of America's living heritage. And that is why this coin deserves our attention, for it tells us that history is not only written in books, but also carried in our pockets. Imagine holding in your hand a small 5-cent piece that looks ordinary to many, but for those who truly know coins, the Jefferson Nickel of 1952 is far from just another pocket change item. It is a piece of American history that carries the weight of an era shaped by post-war recovery, political change, and economic growth. And in this journey, we will uncover the full story of the 1952 Jefferson Nickel, from its design origins to the history of the minting process, to the role it played in commerce, to the varieties and mint marks that make it highly collectible, and we will dive deep into its significance to collectors, historians, and everyday Americans who used this coin in their daily lives, because behind the shine of every nickel lies the story of a nation in motion. The Jefferson Nickel itself began its life in 1938, when the United States Mint sought to replace the Buffalo nickel that had been circulating since 1913. The winning design came from Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor whose vision of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse became iconic over the years. This design endured through World War II, when nickels temporarily shed their nickel content and were struck in an alloy of silver, manganese, and copper to save the critical metal for the war effort by 1946. However, the wartime alloys were retired, and the nickel returned to its traditional 75% copper and 25% nickel composition. And it was in this post-war world that the 1952 Jefferson Nickel was struck, a time when America was asserting its global leadership and domestic life was expanding with suburban growth, consumer goods, and the optimism of the baby boom. The 1952 Jefferson Nickel was struck at 3 mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia Mint produced the largest quantity with no mint mark, while Denver used the D mint mark and San Francisco the S mint mark. This would actually be one of the last years for San Francisco Jefferson Nickels, as the mint stopped producing them in 1954, making those San Francisco nickels from the early 50s particularly notable in the long series of Jefferson Nickels. Each mint location tells its own story of production, quality, die preparation, and striking details. Collectors today examine these variations to better understand the minting process and to assess rarity and value. On the obverse side, Jefferson's portrait remained largely unchanged from the original Schlag design, though the mint made adjustments over the years to improve clarity and striking sharpness in 1952. The coins were still known for having soft strikes, especially on the steps of Monticello, which became an important detail for collectors. The full step designation indicates sharpness in the reverse strike, and full step examples of 1952 nickels, especially from certain mints, are considered significantly more desirable and valuable than typical circulated examples. The 1952 nickel was part of everyday circulation at a time when a nickel had meaningful buying power. It could purchase a candy bar, a soda, or pay part of a bus fare, and these coins passed through countless hands in a decade when the Cold War was intensifying. Dwight D. Eisenhower had just been elected president, and the Korean War was coming to an end. American families were buying their first televisions, cars, and homes, and through all of this, the Jefferson nickel remained a familiar constant, a coin that was not flashy, but stable and trustworthy, just as Jefferson himself symbolized stability and intellectual grounding in the nation's identity. For collectors, the 1952 Jefferson Nickel presents several points of interest. Circulation strikes are plentiful, but finding them in higher mint state grades with sharp details is challenging. The San Francisco issues are lower in mintage compared to Philadelphia and Denver, and thus more prized proof coins were also produced in Philadelphia, and these 1952 proofs are a fascinating study in their own right. The quality of the strike, the mirror finish, and the careful handling of proof sets makes them distinct in the eyes of numismatists. Errors and varieties also play a role in the 1952 Jefferson Nickel. Story collectors have noted repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and other striking anomalies that increase value and spark excitement. When discovered, these varieties highlight the fact that minting is both a technological and human process, where imperfections create unexpected treasures. The legacy of the 1952 Jefferson Nickel is not only about rarity or monetary worth, but about its place in a larger narrative. It represents a period when America was transitioning from war into peace, when coins were still primarily about function, but slowly becoming objects of collecting passion. It is a coin that links us to Thomas Jefferson, the statesman, the philosopher, the author of the Declaration of Independence, while also tying us to mid-20th century America, a land of optimism, growth, and change. When you look closely at a 1952 Jefferson Nickel, you are not just seeing a 5-cent piece. You are holding a story of artistry, history, economy, and culture. It is a window into an era that can be explored for hours, from the story of Felix Schlag and his design, to the evolution of minting practices, to the world of coin collectors who prize these coins for their beauty and history. The 1952 nickel stands as both artifact and legacy. So if you want to understand why this coin matters, if you want to know why collectors spend lifetimes searching for the perfect example, If you want to see how a simple piece of change can tell the story of an entire nation, then the 1952. Jefferson Nickel is your guide, a coin that in its small size holds the weight of history and the promise of a deeper connection to the American past. Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of American history, a coin that does not just carry a monetary value, but tells a story of design, politics, economy, and the people who shaped a nation. The 1956 Jefferson Nickel may look like just another 5-cent piece to the untrained eye, but once you begin to explore its origins, its production, its role in mid-20th century America, and its legacy in numismatics, you realize it is far more than ordinary. It is a reflection of the United States. During the post-war era, a time of prosperity, a time of Cold War tension, a time when coinage itself was a tool of national identity. The story of the Jefferson Nickel begins in 1938, when the United States Mint retired the Buffalo nickel and introduced the new design honoring Thomas Jefferson and his iconic home. Monticello, the designer, was Felix Schlag, whose vision gave Americans a simple yet enduring image of one of the nation's most important founding fathers by the mid-1950s. This design had already been in circulation for nearly 2 decades, but every single year carried its own significance, influenced by changes in minting technology, shifts in metal supplies, and the broader cultural context of the United States. The year 1956 was a fascinating one for American coinage, and the Jefferson Nickel is no exception. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. The nation was in the midst of the Cold War. The interstate highway system had just begun reshaping the American landscape. Elvis Presley was rising as a cultural icon, and coins like the 1956 Jefferson Nickel were quietly circulating in every pocket purse and cash register, connecting the lives of ordinary citizens to the broader economic machine of the United States. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint struck the 1956 nickels, each carrying its own subtle distinctions that collectors today study with intense precision. Production of the 1956 Jefferson Nickel reached over 100 million pieces in Philadelphia and more than 67 million pieces in Denver. Yet not all nickels are created equal, because quality of strike, die polishing, mint errors, and the preservation of luster have made some examples far more desirable to collectors today. A sharp strike with full steps on Monticello, meaning the steps are clearly defined without blending, is a key attribute that transforms an ordinary circulated coin worth only 5 cents into a high-grade treasure that may command hundreds or even thousands of dollars at auction. To fully appreciate the 1956 nickel, we must examine the details of its design. Jefferson's profile facing left remains dignified and statesmanlike. The word liberty, written in a cursive hand, adds a personal touch. The date, 1956, holds its place firmly on the obverse, while Monticello on the reverse reminds us of Jefferson's architectural achievement. The structure symbolizes not just a home, but the intellectual spirit of the Enlightenment that Jefferson embodied. The design, though simple, is deeply symbolic, tying together themes of leadership, independence, and enduring national pride. Minting technology of the 1950s also played a critical role in how the 1956 nickel appears today. This was a period before the widespread use of computer-assisted engraving, so dies were cut and maintained by skilled engravers. At the mint's polishing of dies sometimes left mirrored surfaces that numismatists classify as proof-like or brilliant. The proofs of 1956 struck at the Philadelphia Mint were made in limited quantities and are especially prized by collectors with their mirror finish and deep cameo contrast. These coins were not meant for circulation, but for collectors and dignitaries, offering a pristine example of the design. Another dimension of the 1956 Jefferson Nickel story is the economic context. Post-war America was booming. Consumer goods were plentiful. The dollar was strong and coinage was abundant, yet inflationary pressures were beginning to rise slowly, and the nickel as a denomination played a crucial role in daily transactions. Vending machines, jukeboxes, bus fares, and small purchases All relied heavily on the 5-cent piece. The 1956 nickel was thus a coin of the people touching nearly every American life on a daily basis. The cultural role of the nickel also deserves attention. During the 1950s, nickels were often associated with soda fountains, diners, and jukeboxes, placing them at the heart of youth culture. A teenager in 1956 could drop a nickel in a jukebox and hear the latest Elvis Presley hit. That very coin could later end up in a cash register at a diner in Ohio before traveling across the country in someone's pocket. This constant movement tied the Jefferson Nickel to the rhythm of American life in ways that few artifacts can match. From a collector's perspective, the 1956 Jefferson Nickel has multiple layers of significance. High-grade mint state examples, especially those with full steps, are exceedingly rare, and command-strong premiums proof coins from the year with deep cameo contrast are highly sought after, while error coins such as double die, strikes off center strikes, and improperly annealed planchets add further intrigue. Each error tells its own story about the challenges of coin production in that era, turning what could be considered a flaw into a collectible treasure. Beyond the physical coin, we must also consider how numismatists study and classify these coins' grading systems. Established by the American Numismatic Association and services like PCGS and NGC, allow collectors to evaluate 1956 nickels with remarkable precision. Terms like MS65 or PR67 denote levels of preservation that significantly impact market value. Thus, the 1956 nickel becomes not only a piece of money, but an object of scientific and historical study. Its condition, its strike, its luster, all factors that transform it from pocket change into an artifact of national heritage. The legacy of the 1956 Jefferson Nickel is also tied to the longevity of the Jefferson series itself as one of the longest-running coin designs in U.S. history. The Jefferson Nickel remained virtually unchanged until 2004, when the Westward Journey series introduced new reverses for a short period before the return of Monticello in 2006. The 1956 issue sits squarely in the middle of that long tradition, bridging the early years of Schlag's design with the modern era as we piece together the historical context. The design evolution, the production statistics, the collector market, and the cultural role of the 1956 Jefferson Nickel, it becomes clear that this coin is not just a small circular piece of metal. It is a window into America in the 1950s. It reflects the prosperity, the anxieties, the culture, and the aspirations of its time. Every worn nickel that passed through the hands of millions of Americans in 1956 carried with it the silent story of Thomas Jefferson Monticello and the ideals of a nation. That was both looking back to its founding and forward to its future. If you want to truly understand America in the mid-20th century, you cannot ignore its coinage, and the 1956 Jefferson Nickel stands as one of the most fascinating examples of how money is never just money. It is history, art, culture, technology, and national identity, all struck into metal and passed from hand to hand, shaping and recording the story of a nation one nickel at a time. Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of American history, a coin that has survived decades of change from the aftermath of the Second World War through the Cold War civil rights struggles and modern digital transformations, and yet it remains a silent witness to all of it. This is not just a nickel, it is the Jefferson Nickel of 1946, and it tells a story far greater than its 5-cent face value. Collectors, historians, and everyday Americans may look at this coin as ordinary. But when you dig deep into its design, production, and historical context, you realize this coin represents resilience, transition, and national identity. The Jefferson Nickel had been first introduced in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel, and was designed by sculptor Felix Schlag, who won the design competition. Schlag's portrait of Thomas Jefferson, facing left with a dignified expression, was chosen to symbolize America's third president, author of the Declaration of Independence, and a key architect of democratic ideals. The reverse depicted Jefferson's Monticello estate, with its neoclassical architecture standing as a monument to Jefferson's vision of liberty and enlightenment. Thinking by 1946, the Jefferson nickel had already endured. A crucial change during World War II when the United States altered the composition of the coin to preserve nickel metal for the war effort from mid-1942 to 1945. Nickels contained an alloy of copper, silver, and manganese, rather than the traditional copper-nickel blend. These were known as war nickels, and they carried a distinctive large mint mark above Monticello to indicate the change. When the war ended in 1945, the United States faced the monumental task of transitioning from wartime production to peacetime industry. Factories that had once built tanks and planes returned to producing consumer goods. Soldiers returned home, and America entered an era of optimism yet uncertainty. The 1946 Jefferson Nickel became the first year in which the coin returned to its original pre-war composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. It was both a return to normalcy and a marker of post-war recovery. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint all struck 1946 nickels, with mintages in the hundreds of millions reflecting a growing economy and the need for circulating coinage to support the post-war boom. The Philadelphia Mint struck the highest mintage at over 161 million pieces. The Denver Mint produced around 45 million, while San Francisco added nearly 14 million, making the S-Mint coins the scarcest of the three in circulation at the time. Collectors today note that while the 1946 nickel is common in lower circulated grades, high-grade uncirculated examples with full steps, details on Monticello are far more elusive. This is due to the quality of striking during the period where weak strikes often plagued Jefferson Nickels. Full steps designations are especially prized by collectors and can command significant premiums. The year 1946 itself adds to the historical weight of this coin. America was emerging as a global superpower. The United Nations had just been founded in 1945, and the United States was leading post-war reconstruction. Under the Marshall Plan domestically, the GI Bill was helping returning veterans pursue education and buy homes. Suburbanization was beginning, and the American economy was shifting toward consumer prosperity. In this context, the Jefferson Nickel circulated in the pockets of citizens buying groceries, paying bus fares, and fueling the everyday lives of Americans who were stepping into a new chapter of national life. From a design perspective, the coin remained unchanged, with Jefferson's profile on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse. Yet it carried symbolic importance. Jefferson's legacy as a champion of liberty was highlighted in a time when America was positioning itself as the leader of the free world, in contrast to the growing tensions with the Soviet Union that would soon escalate into the Cold War. The nickel's metallic return from silver wartime alloy to copper-nickel blend also symbolized peace, stability, and economic normalcy. Once again, Americans could handle a nickel that looked and felt like the ones before the war for collectors. The 1946 Jefferson Nickel represents a pivotal transitional issue. It is not rare in the sense of low mintage, but its historical positioning as the first peacetime nickel after the war makes it significant. The San Francisco Mint issues are scarcer and more challenging to find in higher grades, which adds collecting interest, while error varieties, such as repunched mint marks or doubled dies, though not extremely common, do exist and provide specialists with unique challenges and rewards in building sets. To fully appreciate the 1946 nickel, one must also place it in the broader timeline of the Jefferson Nickel series. The early years from 1938 to 1941 saw the introduction and establishment of Schlag's design. Then the war years from 1942 to 1945 introduced the silver alloy nickels, which have always fascinated collectors for their wartime context. Then 1946 marked the return to the classic alloy and symbolized the nation's shift to peacetime. By the late 1940s and into the 1950s, Jefferson Nickels would continue to circulate widely, becoming one of the most familiar and stable denominations in American coinage history, beyond numismatics. The 1946 nickel tells us about the psychology of a nation. Coins are daily objects handled by millions, yet they capture the mood of their time. In 1946, the nation was filled with optimism and rebuilding energy. The soldiers were back, industries were booming, and coins like the Jefferson nickel were the currency of this prosperity. Each one circulated in countless hands, buying newspapers, ice cream sodas, streetcar tickets, and small luxuries that symbolized the return of peace. In the decades since the 1946 nickel has become a staple of collections, especially for those building complete Jefferson nickel sets from 1938 onward, its value in circulated condition remains modest, but in uncirculated condition with sharp details and lustrous surfaces, it can fetch strong prices. Registry set collectors especially seek out coins with full steps designations, as these demonstrate the pinnacle of quality and strike precision from an era when such coins were not easy to produce. When you look closely at a 1946 Jefferson nickel, you see more than metal. You see the transition from war to peace, from scarcity to abundance, from uncertainty to optimism. You see the image of Thomas Jefferson, whose ideals continued to inspire a post-war America charting its destiny on the world stage. You see Monticello standing firm like the Republic itself, resilient after global conflict. And you see the craftsmanship of the United States Mint, resuming traditional practices after years of extraordinary wartime measures. This coin, therefore, is not merely a 5-cent piece. It is a bridge in American history, a marker of return, a symbol of stability, and a tangible reminder of 1946, a year when the world was being reshaped and the United States was stepping into a new role on the global stage. It continues to fascinate collectors, historians, and storytellers alike, making it one of the most interesting issues in the Jefferson Nickel series.